recruiting starts through an interaction online, as opposed to before how you might submit something, to someone you might know, or you might have been at a fair. The majority of it starts online. And so if you think about the role of a recruiter, that person is getting intake all day from different types of people expressing interest. And so they are thinking about this request that they have from this leader in the business saying, hey, I need a certain set of skills. I need a certain set of experiences. And if I'm lucky, I have this sort of character profile that I need on my team to help me get this work done or to help me achieve my objectives. And so that recruiter is trying to take all of that in and in a very quick and efficient way, figure out how to mine through all of these potential candidates to get to a pool of individuals that they can then take back to that hiring leader to potentially talk to you about that opening. So just think about that is the place where a talent acquisition or a recruiter is starting their day. They're taking this input from this hiring leader, and then they're trying to figure out how to mine this vast space of talented individuals to figure out how to narrow that down and get a good slate to present. And so if you think about that, how do you stand out in a sea of very talented people? And so the first thing is a recruiter is really going to be thinking about how do I narrow, because there's so much out here. And so you have to think about, okay, how am I presenting myself in a way that sort of stands out? I don't just look like just what the machine may spit out or the tool may spit out in terms of my qualifications. And so you think about it, a recruiter is going to start by what? Searching keywords oftentimes to figure out who in this list of talent that I might have will even have what this hiring manager has already said they're looking for. Because likely that recruiter has built a profile or a filter or an assessment to help them lift up the candidates to the top that match a certain set of keywords. And so what you may want to think about is, as you're looking at some of the job requisitions and as you're thinking about your experiences, how do you make sure your resume or your CV actually speaks to these different types of experiences that you have? And this is where you have to be careful. Sometimes in our industry, we call things different things. We have particularly if you're in telecom, we have an acronym for everything. So you have to think about some of the language we use, because sometimes we don't talk about our experience in a way that's very transportable to something else because we're calling it something that's so technical to what we call it in our specific company, where it actually transcends the work in other places. But because we aren't using the right language of our work, it may be getting us cut off. So that's the first thing to think about. How are you writing your what you're putting forth as your resume or your CV to ensure that it even rises to a recruiter's desktop or whatever their device is to even begin to talk to you? So that's the first thing. The other thing to think about is how concise can you be in explaining? So one is a content, the first thing that I talked about. The next thing is a style, an approach. So how concise can you be and how you talk about who you are and your experiences? And so what I mean by that is we always have a lot of stuff going on. Folks are very busy. And so, I know when I used to get stacks of resumes, we all have our kind of, how are we going to cut through this? The ones that you tend to go to first are the ones that are styled very concisely. They're neat. It's easy to review because, again, you're going back and you're looking at your set of criteria that you and that hiring manager have agreed to as a recruiter. And you're going back to look at whether or not, hey, yes, does this make sense for me to put this person forward? And the easiest way for the recruiter to do that is for you to have presented your information in a way that's very concise, easy to understand, flows very seamlessly, and looks exactly like, hey, yeah, you know what? Cher looks good. I'm going to send her forward. So those are some of the things again. So we start with content. Is your content great? And then second, have you styled it in a way that it resonates with the recruiter so it's sufficient for them to cut through and make sure they're lifting you through the top? So those are just the first a couple of steps. And then the final thing is, what do you do when that recruiter calls you to talk to you? How do you make sure you stand out? Because oftentimes recruiters are the first point of contact that you have to even sort of sell and state your case for why you're the person to be considered. And so sometimes, I've seen a candidate sometimes say, well, I'm just talking to the recruiter. I'll save my good stuff to when I get to the hiring manager. No, you got to bring it each point. So you talk to that recruiter just like they are making the final hiring decision, because it's that role that's going to stay consistently with you throughout the process and will be telling that hiring manager how you showed up the entire way through that process, because that is one of the ways you understand not just someone's competence, not just someone's confidence, but also their character. So those are the three things from a recruiting perspective that I always encourage every applicant or every potential candidate looking for their next shot to consider it from the vantage point of a recruiter. So I'll pause there. Any questions?
Awesome.
I can't see the chat. So Bern, you tell me if there's any questions or anything like that.
No questions yet. And
Okay.
thank you very much. It is beautiful. I love what you're sharing. And is there more any more golden nuggets that you have, or?
Yeah, sure. So I'll keep going. I like to, I can talk your head
Absolutely.
off. So I like to pause. So I'll keep
Yes,
going.
ma'am.
So, all right. So that's just, you're sort of on the phone. A lot of these interactions are virtual or on the phone. Some companies are still doing all of their process virtual. Some are still having folks come in. So it really just depends on the culture of the company that you're interested in. And so the question I always get when I'm out talking to potential prospects for my company is, hey, should I dress up for the interview if it's virtual? Yes. Even if you are suited up from waist up. Yes. I mean, look, I get it. Like if you want to interview with your bunny slippers on, can't see that. But from here, from neck up, yes, because even in a virtual environment, presentation is important. Again, it goes to how bad do you want this? And when you're interviewing for a role, it's a very comparative nature kind of event where you are being compared to different candidates. And so if you're in there and you just, just sort of woke up and rolled up and like, hey, I'm interviewing for this job I want, but someone else got up, put themselves together, presented themselves like, I want this job, then when you're in comparison with that candidate, guess who's going to be the standout person? It's the person who took the time to present the best of themselves to show that they wanted that role. So I get that all the time. So it's those nuances that recruiters pay attention to as well. There's also the, how do I actually prepare? So here are some of the things if you're actually during the interview. One, recruiters do look for confidence because, again, it's their role to present the best of their slate to that hiring manager. So if you are, if you get nervous, if you're very shy, like I'm very introverted. This will be surprising for a lot of people that I work with. I'm very introverted and I'm kind of shy. And so I get really nervous when I have to present or I have to talk about myself because it just feels weird. But the best way to do it is just be prepared. Have your talking points, think about all the things you've done in your career. That is your hustle to be proud of. And so make note of those pivotal things you've done in your career. If you've gone back to school, if you solved a major problem at work, just make a couple of bullet points about your story so that even if you are prone to be nervous or you're a little shy, it won't matter because when you're prepared to tell your story, then it's about performing. So you just get prepared to perform in that interview so you can project your best self. You can be confident because that is your story to tell. And so that's another thing again, what are recruiters looking for? It's that confidence, it's that command of, yes, if I put this person forward, this hiring manager is going to be very proud because they're going to believe I've presented them with a candidate that can get this job done and could be a successful member of the team. So we've talked about resume. We've talked about your phone interview that you typically have with a recruiter. We talked about how you present. We just talked about how you might build your story. The other thing is, this is one of the things that I will tell you, it lands on people differently. So I'm going to tell you from my perspective as a hiring manager, what I actually appreciate that candidates actually do. And it lands very differently. So you really have to understand the culture of the company that you're looking to go work for and the style of that leader. When people come into an interview, it gets to that point where you say, hey, Sandra, do you have any questions to ask of me in the interview? And if you get like dead silence, I'm like, oh, did they research the role? They like, nope. Are you interested at all? So I mean, just have one question, even if it's, hey, what is it like to be a member of your team? What do you look for? How do people succeed? Like, give yourself like an easy layup question, just so you show that you are interested. Because remember, there are other people who are using different ways to show that they want the job. And one of the ways that I look for is, who's really interested, who really wants it. So that's one thing. While you're in the interview, make sure you are asking questions. When you are actually like we do, different companies use a lot of behavioral based interviewing. And so my advice there is, if you are doing behavioral based interviewing, what recruiters are all also looking for is specific experiences. Like, think about it. They're trying to picture you doing this role that this hiring manager has said they want. And so think about how you can, again, you've been preparing your story. So think about how you translate your story into telling about these actual experiences that show that you have the competence. And sometimes this is where I see sometimes candidates sort of get tripped up a little bit. And that's where you might get a question and you're like, well, I haven't had that exact experience. So it starts to make you a little nervous. And you're like, oh, I don't know if I can answer it. Remember, there are things that we have the aptitude to do and that we can transfer from other experiences to show how we might do that work. So don't be afraid to use that as an example as well, as opposed to saying, like, I'll hear some people say, well, I've never done that. I don't know that I'll be able to do that. You don't know what you have the potential to do, and you might have some things in your past that you may have called it something different, but it actually is directly related to the work that leader needs you to get done for them. You just have to be able to speak it into the language that's needed for that role. So I would share that as advice too. And then, so I told you, make sure you have a question to ask. And then this is another tactic that I've seen help people stand out. In addition to asking questions, a lot of people will ask for the job. Sometimes it lands very interesting. Like, if the first time I heard it, I'm gonna be real serious. The first time I heard it, I was like, oh, this is weird. Because it puts the hiring manager like, well, I got all these people I have to talk to. But what it told me, I remembered the person. I remember when I was going through my selection, I remembered, oh yeah, it was Trish that asked me about this job. Let me go back. So it makes you memorable. So I've seen a lot of people ask to close the deal. Now, depending on the type of job that you are looking for, the final follow-up tip that I will give you, and the higher you go in your different companies, the more this becomes important, particularly if you're looking to move into different kinds of leadership roles. In addition to asking your question, closing to the deal, and sending your thank you note, the other thing that I've seen successful people do is to send their 90-day plan. Hey, I just want to let you know I appreciate this opportunity. that I've had to interview with you. This is what I remember we talked about in the interview. Let me play back my 90-day plan on how I think I can help you and do this work for you. And I mean, one time that plan made a difference. And like, I think I was going to go in another direction, but that employee showed me, oh, this is what they're about to take off my plate in the next 90 days. So, I mean, so it makes a difference. So those are my tips, one from the seat of the recruiter and from the seat of the hiring manager, and how you might think about getting prepared, telling your story with conviction and confidence, being proud of your story, translating your great experience so that you can be heard and people can see how you might possibly do this work, asking for the opportunity, and then ensuring you're putting things in place to secure that opportunity. So that's really the journey from a candidate experience that I would share with you, that it's worked for people that I've seen really grow their careers and go off to do, whether it's here or at other organizations. These are just some things that I've seen people in my network do to really power up and supercharge their career.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have a question. We know the statistics that unless women fit 10 of 10 of the criteria, we won't apply for a job. We won't even put our name in the ring. How do we, as women, even though we don't hit all 10 of the markers, how do we set our resume up to where we're making it through the filter of the keywords? If we don't hit all 10 of the 10 and you guys and the recruiters filter through keywords, how do we set our resume up to possibly hit more of the keywords than we might not?
So I don't think it's just about hitting the keywords, because the people that are making it through the filter aren't always hitting the 10 out of 10, because you can't exclude people if they hit the minimum requirements. So it's really, but what I see from the example that you are sharing is the women won't even apply. The challenge that I see is the people are the guys will say, hey, I got 3 of these, boom, I'm applying. And, they get in, and, we're sitting back. Look, we have the job. Look, we're sitting back. We have our resume, the job description right here. We're going, oh, I don't have this one. Oh, never mind. Whereas the guys are like, send. So that is, so to me, that is, so what I try to do is say, it's what I talked about earlier. So what I try to encourage is, don't get so wrapped up in the language of that job description. Think about what is transportable about the work and experience that you have that is directly tied to that work. We might just be calling it something different. And we just have to make sure we aren't constructing these boxes for ourselves that other people don't construct for themselves, because they don't see the box. They say, oh, I got 3, I'm in, and go from there. So I hope that I didn't get your name. What's your name?
Lisa Allen.
Hey, Lisa. Thank you for the question.
You're welcome.
I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
First off, Kia, thank you for joining us. You mentioned 90-day plan. 90-day plan before the interview or after the interview?
After the interview. And let me tell you why, because you want to make sure your 90-day plan includes things you heard that manager say they needed. See, if you do it before then, you run the risk of it looking a little arrogant, like, how you know what I need? I mean, I'm just being real. I mean, that's how it can come off. Whereas it's like, and look, you might have already had 60 days of it constructed, but you don't want to send it yet. You want to wait until you've gotten that input from that hiring manager to say, you know what, I can do this for you. Let me go ahead and incorporate that feedback. And then you send it with a, hey, I heard you say, here's my 90-day plan on how I might address the challenges that you said the team is facing and the opportunities you want to seize, and go from there.
Thank you. Good point.
Yep.
Thank you.
Was that Terry?
Awesome.
I can't see. Was that Terry?
It is.
Hey, all
very much, Kia. And again,
Welcome.
we appreciate you taking the time to speak to us.
Thank
Next, we're going to go ahead and we're going to introduce Casey Alexander. And she's going to talk to us about how to stand out in the pool of people that you're up against.
Well, listen, I feel like I'm so excited to go after Kia. Can I melt now? No, I'm just kidding. Really, so Kia had a lot of really good nuggets. There's some stuff that I now crossed off what I was going to tell you, like just kidding. But no, I'm going to start and talk to you about how to stand out during the interview process or even before you apply for a position. And this is something that I do, and I've only ever applied internally, so it translates really well within our culture. But again, like Kia said, sometimes things, it may land with some people and it may not land with others. So I'm going to break down everything into parts. First, we're going to start with contact the hiring manager. I'm going to break this up into two parts. And first, I'm going to talk about the emotion that goes into this, especially if you've never done it before. So the first time somebody told me to contact the hiring manager, I was like, you have got to be kidding me. Like, no way. I'm already nervous about applying for a role. And I'm looking at some faces in here that I know probably would be nervous about that. And the girl's right here. But honestly, it shows a few things. So before I get into what it shows from the hiring manager perspective, think about from that manager's point. You've now reached out to me. So now I may not know you, but now I know like who's in my candidate pool, who has interest. I'm also human, right? So I'm hiring for my team. I don't know who you are from Adam, right? I'm at the mercy of the recruiter, but now you put yourself in front of me. So as much as, that's nerve-wracking for you, the hiring manager, I've yet to meet one that hasn't agreed to meet with me. So think about it from their perspective. Now let's talk about it from your guys' perspective or from the applicant's perspective and what that does. So for one, it shows interest. It shows, hey, I'm interested in this role. Kia mentioned that earlier, if you remember her saying, hey, if you ask the right questions, I want to know you're interested. Do you want this job? I'm going to do it beforehand. I'm going to show you I'm interested. I'm also going to show initiative. I want to seek to understand what this posting actually means. What does this day-to-day look like? So I'm going to seek to understand that. The other part of that, so the second part of once you connect with a hiring manager is it allows you to have an organic conversation with them. So you haven't applied yet for the role. You're just really wanting to learn about it and then also learn about a little bit, learn about them a little bit. So now I've had this organic conversation. So let's say the conversation goes good, which we'll talk about what to say here in a second, but now you're memorable. Hey, hiring manager now remembers you. What does that look like when they're talking to the recruiter? Okay, so now I understand the why. This is why I'm going to do it. Next, what do I say? So I see Tiffany, yes. All right, so I'm nervous. I'm going to meet this hiring manager. What do I say? Well, first I'm going to put a little bit of time on their calendar. Nothing crazy. Don't kill somebody's calendar with an hour meeting. Maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and you come prepared. You come with a good 2 to 3 questions about the role, right? So we've all read job postings. Anybody in here been confused by a job posting? Like, what does this day-to-day look like? All right, so those are going to be my questions. I want to seek to understand what does the day-to-day look like? What does success in this role look like after 90 days or 60 days? Hey, I'm going to prep for my 30, 60, 90. So I'm going to find out these questions when I'm chatting with them. And then me personally, because I'm a people person and I like to know who I'm working for, I also want to find out something personable about them. Do they have 10 cats? Do they have kids? Tell me something about yourself, because now that person is a human to me. And I humanize them because, again, when we're interviewing, it's really easy to get nervous. But now I've made that person human, and people are people, right? And so it's just important to do that. All right, so now we know the why, we know what to say, all right? So what's the benefit for you? So now I understand the role. I've now asked my questions. I understand the day-to-day. I have the job description too. But what else do I understand? Well, the hiring manager literally told me what the day-to-day is. I need to have some self-awareness. Is this something I want to do every single day? Not can I do it right now, because you can learn anything. but is it something I want to do every single day? All right. If it is, great. Go ahead and hit that apply. Lisa stole my thunder earlier, but I think that the other part is this is a good time to really check qualifications for yourself to understand, like, hey, women, we don't apply for every role unless we check every box, right? Instead, now I've talked to this hiring manager. I understand the day-to-day. I'm self-aware, so I know myself. Can I learn this job? Like, I may not check every box, but can I learn this job? Chances are yes. If you're interested and you made it that far and you match and it's a good fit for you, go for it. All right? Now we got the plan with the hiring manager. So it's first, reach out. Don't be scared. Just do it. You know what to say. We know the benefits. We know what we're going to learn. We're going to learn about the role. Next step before you apply is I definitely recommend reaching out to peers on the team, because these people are going to be people you work with every day. So do you want to work with them every day? But also, not just that, you'll be able to find out the team dynamic. What does their day-to-day look like? Does that differ from what the manager just told you? You know, what's the day in the life? What do they struggle with? What is some things that they really love about their job that they would never change? It just gives you a really good idea about the team, the role, and that role may be very different from the one you're applying for, but still it all goes cohesively together. All right? Okay. So now we're going to talk about the day of the interview and what to, I'm not going to steal Tasha's thunder because she's going to talk about what to prepare, but I'm going to tell you 3 things it won't hurt to hear again if this is the same thing she has. So 1, get yourself a hype man. I do this before every interview. My last interview, I called First Sheet. I don't know if you guys know First Sheet, but I was like, I need 5 minutes of your time, First Sheet, because I just need you to tell me how great I am. And for 10 minutes, if you know First Sheet, he actually went 20. He told me how awesome I was. And then he was like, is that what you need? I was like, keep going. So, no, get yourself a hype man. Get yourself somebody that is just going to boost your confidence. Because as Kia mentioned earlier, confidence is key. And you're already nervous. And everybody's nervous going into an interview, but just having that hype man to tell you how great you are is just icing on the cake, okay? So there's 1. The next part is, and this I can guarantee you, like I don't know every interview question, but I can 1,000,000% guarantee you this question will be on there. And this is the one that, I don't know if everybody fails, but I have failed this one a few times. Tell me about yourself. Everybody know, tell me about yourself. We spend so much time prepping for all of these perfect scenarios, right? And I have been asked this in one time. I only failed it one time because I was like, oh, I'll never do that again. But one time I failed to prep for the tell me about yourself question, and I forgot all about myself. Like, I couldn't tell you anything. I barely knew my name. Like, it was a mess. So I promise you have to prep for the tell me about yourself question. And this isn't just a generic, you know, well, I'm Casey and I've been in sales. No, like, who are you? This is your time to share a story, and people are captivated by stories, right? We all love a good story, and every single one of us has one. So who are you? Tell me about yourself. So, and I'm going to use Kia's word. This may land differently for other people, but I like it. So I sent a candidate profile before I interview to the hiring manager, and it has my story in it, and I go through that. Now, it's not a 30-minute presentation. It's literally like a couple minutes. But I'm a visual person, and I think that my story is really pretty, so I like to send pictures. So I sent a picture of my kids because I'm a mom of 2. I have a son and a daughter, and they're cute, so I like to send them. People gravitate towards them. I have a cool husband. I like to read and travel, so I'll just put a few pictures because they're part of my story. They are a huge part of my story. Another part of my story is that we all have a superpower. So I make sure that I include that when I'm talking. My superpower is that I genuinely love people, and building relationships comes easy to me. I don't just say that, I say why. I moved around a lot as a kid. I went to like 11 different schools. And if I wanted friends, I had to learn to connect real quick at like the age of 6. And so I share that because that has helped translate into who I am as an adult. So anyways, so that's part of my story, and I share this in a captivating way, and I just really am authentic to who I am. I also make sure that I include a few accomplishments that match up to what I had talked to them about and my meeting with them prior that I think would translate to this job, because that's also part of my story. It's something I'm really proud about. So I just make sure to share those things as well. Okay, so first thing in the interview, well, pre-interview, hype man, don't forget that. Second thing, know who you are. Like, don't be Casey and not the interview a long time ago. And then the next two things, and these are ones just to keep in your back pocket because, again, as I shared earlier, we spend so much time perfecting who we are and trying to be perfect, like for these interviews, right? And we've never messed up in life, and I'm going to share my best foot forward. There's two things that I think that's just really important that showcase and help, present yourself very well. Is one, have something that maybe you don't know right now, but that you are wanting to learn or you're in the process of learning. Just in your back pocket so you can share. Because chances are if it's a new role, you got to learn something new. Nobody signs up for the same position they have now. So have that in your back pocket. If you don't have something that you're doing that for currently, I recommend starting. But also the last one is think of a situation where maybe something didn't go as perfectly as you wanted, or it just was a total bomb, right? I've yet to meet a perfect person. I'm sure we all have these stories in our back pocket, but where you've come back and you've pivoted, right? You've made the adjustments, and it's a story where you can share some triumph, right? Like, so yes, it was a failure, but guess what? This is what I did. Those are great stories to have in your back pocket. And those are things that sometimes we don't think about when we're interviewing because we're trying to think of all of these perfect scenarios to showcase ourselves in the best light. And believe it or not, those little nuggets are also things that show you in a really great light because it can show humility and your ability to adjust and overcome obstacles and those sorts of things. Okay? All right, well, I'm done. I feel like I talk really fast. My nerves get to me. But, any questions for me?
I have a question.
Yes.
So when you're doing like your story with your pictures and your family and stuff, is that on your resume or where are you?
I do it in just a little PowerPoint. It's very small. Like, I don't want to don't send somebody. It's a very, very short, just a couple slides. So when they ask me, I'm just like, hey, I actually sent this over an hour before my interview. Do you mind if I share my screen really quick? And I walk through it. Again, it lands differently for some people. I've been prepared for that person to tell me no. I'm like, okay, look at it later on your time. I don't know. And then I'll talk through it, but nobody's told me no yet. But it's very, not a lot. Don't send a lot. Any other questions?
Great job.
Yep.
Well, cool.
All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Case. And so now we have what the recruiter's looking for. We have how to stand out in the crowd. And last but not least, certainly not least, we have Tasha Bonwell. God, I'm gonna get it. I promise. I'm so used to you being Tasha Street forever. So Tasha Bonwell, and she's going to tell us how to prepare for this interview. One of the most successful interviewers I've met in my entire life, and so if you get tips from anyone, she's the lady. So let's hear from Tasha.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Don't worry, you can still go by Street. I haven't changed in the system because if you've ever had to change your name, you know how hard it is to change it. So I just left it as Street.
Yes.
So I will talk about how to best prepare for the interview. And I'm going to actually deep dive in some of the things that you've already heard. So I'm going to give you how to do those things. So the confidence part of it. So let's start. The first part is Kia talked about, writing some key things down, right? I'm going to tell you to start preparing now. So even if you're not decided, you haven't decided to look on or do something else, as of today, if you haven't already started, keep a OneNote on yourself, a OneNote or an email or something, an Excel, whatever you like to do. If you're a writer, you're old school and you like to write pen and paper, I do that still too. Whatever it is, have one on yourself. And what you're going to do is from here going forward, any opportunity that you get, so any chance you get where you have displayed your skill, you're going to make note of that. And you're going to make note of, what it was, what you did, and what was the result. And you're going to start that now, because no matter what interview you go into, what company you're interviewing for, there's going to be specific things they want to know, right? And the worst part about it is you go into a brain fog when you start to interview and you're like, oh my gosh, what have I done? Even though you have the experience, you've done the work, but there's something about, when you get into that interview, it just makes you freeze, right? So instead of doing that, instead of having to come up with that information right off the top of your head, if you're preparing now, when it's time for you to interview, you'll have that stuff there. And that will help you when it comes to the confidence, right? So I will get into the confidence a little bit more because that is absolutely one of the most important things. But prepare now. So that would be my first advice for you, is start preparing now. Second, most companies now use the STAR format. So if you haven't interviewed before, if it's been a while that you've interviewed, most companies use that format. The format is the situation and or task at hand that you were given, the action that you took, and the result from that action, right? And one of the biggest flaws that most people do when they are interviewing is they spend too much time in the action part of the response versus the resolution, what happened. So what you want to do is, when you're looking over your prepared now information, you want to make sure the meat of your response lies in the result, right? And so keep that in mind as you are interviewing. When you're responding to the question at hand, you want to think, my result is what really matters. That's what the interviewer wants to know. Yes, what you did is important, but what was the result of what you did? Okay, so results is everything. Next thing is know the role. So Kia talked about this. Casey talked about this. This all goes into when you speak to the hiring manager ahead of time, when you speak to who may be your future partners ahead of time, you are learning the role. And the reason why you do this is because all that prepared information that you have, you can now tailor your answers to the role, because the point of the interview is so that the interviewer can envision you in the role. So if you're not prepared, you're not able to actually show the interviewer what you would do if you were sitting in that seat, right? So your job is to be able to give them the best visual of how you are going to tackle that role when you're interviewing. You cannot do that if you don't understand the role, and tailor your answers to the role itself. So let's talk about confidence. So confidence is probably one of the most important things. You've heard it already from Casey, you've heard it from Kia, but let me give you a little bit more deep dive into confidence and why it's important. If you go into an interview and you are not confident in yourself, how do you expect me as the interviewer to be confident in you? Okay, because who knows you better than yourself? So if you show up in the interview and you're nervous and you can't really say how you're going to do the job, then that's going to scare me as the interviewer, because why would I hire you? So you have to think about that when you're going into an interview. You have to think that no one knows you and what you can do better than yourself. And if you are not confident about speaking to that, then you have to work on the confidence in you. Okay. And so that's going to be huge. That will, even if you think you didn't answer a question correctly, if you are confident about what you can do in the job and the skills that you have, that will overshadow if you answered that question the way they wanted to hear it, if that makes sense. Okay, so confidence, how do you build on that confidence? I'm gonna tell you how you build on that confidence. Start preparing now. Because if you start preparing now and you're writing down everything that you've done, so you were given a task and you completed that task, that should be written down. And as you are writing that stuff down, you can go back and remind yourself, that's right, this is what I did. That's right, this is how I handled that. That's right, I know what I'm doing. I can do this job, right? And those little key things help slowly build your confidence. And it allows you to remember and see what you bring to the table. And your job when you're interviewing, like I said before, is to show the interviewer what you will bring to the table. Okay, so confidence is key. Confidence is everything. And then Casey talked about this a little bit. She talked about the tell me about you. It actually transcends into the why me, right? The why me. So some companies ask this in their question when they're interviewing. It's normally the last question they ask, and some companies don't. And that's okay. So someone asked earlier, well, what happens if you're asking questions throughout the interview? And so when they ask you, do you have any questions? You've asked them all, right? This is your time to shine. So instead of you having to ask that question because you've already asked those questions throughout, you take the opportunity to give the why you. Because in the case that you just feel like you failed, that you didn't get out what you needed to get, or you feel that the questions that were being asked didn't really display the skills that you wanted to showcase, here's your time to shine. So when they say, do you have any questions for us? Actually, I don't have any more questions, but I do want to say, why me? And this is your little 30-second, you call it the elevator speech. This is your elevator speech about you. And you can take that moment to tell them why you are best for that role. This is you now giving them the visual of what you would do in that seat. So prepared in doing your interview, those are the things that I recommend for you to be able to go into the interview and show up your best self. Any questions?
But I think I'm gonna use Tasha for my hype person.
I know.
I feel like I'm ready to interview now. Hey, I don't have a question, and I'm sorry if Kia already mentioned this, but one other thing that I would strongly suggest is there are leaders that will help you practice interview.
Yes, absolutely.
And maybe Kia mentioned that, but I will tell you, I've done that for many people, and for you to sit there and go through the questions and
Yes.
talk through it is a whole lot different than talking through it in your head.
And do it with a leader too, Colleen.
And
That's
do it
really,
with a
because
leader.
it gives you that anxiety, like,
Yes.
oh, I
Yeah,
gotta
it makes you
somebody.
super nervous.
Yeah, but they'll tell you and it's practice. Yeah, I mean, that's really good advice.
When you hear it, it's one thing to practice it to yourself or in a mirror. It's a whole other thing for somebody to ask you questions that they're not expecting. And we all have access to some STAR questions, and it gets you thinking in that way. So, and I would volunteer to do that for anyone that is going through that process.
And I would just add to that, another really good piece of advice, and it's kind of, Tasha, what you were talking about, that I was given years ago was, it's okay to have notes and a piece of paper in front of you when you're interviewing. So I would write out my situations on a paper and really put them in categories almost. This is my building relationships category, and here's my stories. This is my conflict story and how I resolved it. This is I had to do something new that wasn't in my wheelhouse. And I would I put them in categories and had them in front of me with a piece of paper, and that's okay. Nobody says you can't have notes when you're interviewing. And that really helped me stay on task, because when you get flustered and you're like, oh, I know I have a story for that. What was it? Well, it's in front of you now. And you can go, take the time, take a breath, look at what you want to say, and then answer the question. That was another really good piece of advice I got years ago. And I just didn't think about, oh, I can have notes when I'm interviewing. I don't have to have everything memorized. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And I mean, if anyone else has any golden nuggets, if there are no questions, please feel free, offer them up. I think it's gonna be like a really good learning experience for everyone here. So does anyone have anything else they'd like to share?
I would piggyback on, I think it was something that Casey said. She said, be prepared to tell about yourself, right? This is one thing that I think all of us as WIC members, or just people as a whole, and I think Tasha just said the closing is the why me. I would take the why to another level. Talk about your personal why, right? Because this whole process that you're going through, it's about relationship building, right? So you're making that connection, and that could be one thing that they remember about you, your why, why, to me, mine, I want to influence people in a positive way, right? I want to be able to show what's possible, the possibilities. So you never know that one little nugget that you may say in talking about yourself and talking about your why, me, that may, and it may not be for that particular position. It may be a position that comes later down the road, because again, you're building relationships, and that's what it's all about.
Awesome.
So there's been some good comments in the chat. Cher said, practice with someone that doesn't know the role or your skills you're interviewing for. They can give good feedback about what does that really mean. And then Sharita said, when you're prepping, recording yourself, answering the questions also helps you to hear what you're saying to add to your answer or take away.
That's a really good point.
Oh, that's amazing.
Hey, Bert, to add on to what Colleen was saying, one of the things that I do with 2 of my mentees is they're not in an interview process, but every time we meet each month, they ask me to bring a star interview question. So I just have a star question, and we just role play one question every single month, and it just keeps their interviewing skills sharp, and it's a great way to give them immediate feedback on their answer.
That's fantastic idea.
That's a really good idea.
Nugget.
Yeah, wonderful.
So if you have a mentor, you should engage them in that way.
Golden nuggets everywhere, guys. I love it. I love it. Who else got something for us?
Piggyback on what Jessica said, a lot of interviews these days are virtual. So instead of having it written on a note and looking down, because where my camera is, like, if I look down, you see the top of my head. When I've interviewed, I've had my
On the second
questions,
screen.
my notes on the screen in a Word document, like zoomed in real big, so I'm not like. But that's a great way to keep the eye contact, but you can have all your notes and it not look like you have your notes and like,
Yeah,
All the secrets.
absolutely. I love it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if we have no more questions and no more golden nuggets, then I would definitely like to thank you guys for coming today. I'd like to give a special thanks to our speakers and our presenters. You guys are amazing. So